Hello and welcome to the CivilTalk Podcast. I'm your host, Tapasio Althouse. If you're new to the show, this is where we explore civility and social emotional learning with esteemed guests, expert insights, and practical advice to help people navigate the world. Today, we are excited to welcome Catherine Mattice. Catherine is the founder and CEO of Civility Partners, a pioneering organizational development firm dedicated to creating respectful and positive workplace cultures. Catherine founded Civility Partners in 2008 with a mission to help organizations address cultural issues like toxic behavior, disengagement, absenteeism, and more. Her team has since transformed hundreds of clients like Chevron, NASA, and Stanford University, to name a few. Catherine's expertise has made her a go-to resource on workplace civility, earning her features in national outlets like USA Today, Entrepreneur, and CNN. She's also an award-winning speaker and author of Back Off, Your Kick-Ass Guide to Ending Bullying at Work, a toolbook to understand, report, and effectively end workplace bullying. Today, Catherine shares her insights and practical strategies for fostering civility with organizations worldwide, helping leaders create environments where employees can truly thrive. We are very excited to converse with Catherine today on all this and more. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So to begin, we'd love to hear more about your personal experience that led you to found Civility Partners and just the overall history with that.
Yeah, I was internal HR and found myself working with a bully, essentially. I was the director of HR. He was also a director. And I just saw firsthand the kind of damage he caused the organization through, all the turnover and things I was dealing with as HR. And then I also was on his list. So experienced being bullied as a person as well, and started getting my master's degree while I was working there in communication, and ended up doing all of my graduate research on the topic of workplace bullying. And once out of grad school, I had all this knowledge rolling around in my head. I wrote Back Off and started Civility Partners.
Right. Yeah. So when you started Civility Partners in 2008, I believe it was a time when civility wasn't as widely discussed as it is today.
Right.
I'd love to hear a lot of your early challenges you faced in building this business when civility and bullying weren't as, in the forefront as they are today.
Yeah, especially that topic of bullying at work was absolutely not a thing. So yeah, I basically had every single person I know tell me you can't create a business around workplace bullying, and the opposite, which is civility. You should maybe be a leadership coach or do communication training. And I was, like, no, I've read thousands of research articles on this. Just because you've never heard of it doesn't mean I can't have a business. So I had to overcome a lot of naysayers. And then when I, started reaching out to HR associations to speak at their little chapter meetings and things, I also got a lot of no's because HR hadn't even heard of bullying. And they would say, like, well, we have harassment. I don't, what would you add? That's not a thing. So it just a lot of having to educate on what bullying even was, and helping companies start to recognize that, hey, this is a problem that may exist in your organization, even though you haven't heard of it or think of it. I would say the school age bullying then started to get a lot of traction. A lot of states started modifying their laws around school age bullying, and that helped also. And then adults kind of started going, well, hey, that happens at work too. And so it's been a journey. It's been, yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to say that's very inspiring as a business owner myself, and just anyone who wants to do anything that is new. It takes a lot of gumption standing for people and say, no, you're wrong, and I need to go through with this because this is something that I have dealt in the workplace. Yeah. And I know that can be a very isolating experience, so just to all our listeners and just for you, I just want to say that's really inspiring as anyone who wants to do anything different and new and, something impactful.
Thank you.
Um, yeah. I'd love to also know what a typical day as the CEO of Civility Partners looks like. How do you, stay connected to the evolving needs of your organization?
That's an interesting question. So far, you're my third meeting in a row, back to back. So I came in this morning, had a sales call with a client, potential client. Then I had a networking meeting, and now I'm here with you.
Mhm.
I'll spend part of my day working on proposals. So the way Civility Partners is set up, I've just been working on this over the last couple of years. It used to be me doing all of the client work, and I had a little back end support, but I really enjoy this type of stuff and being on stage and kind of getting the word out. So I've really evolved into business development and sales. And then I have a fantastic team of consultants and coaches who take the work on once I've sold it to a potential client. So that's a lot of my time. And I like the sales part because I get to really strategize about solving problems. So, a client will call and say, we need a training on, stress management. And then I get to ask a lot of questions and generally help them realize training on stress is probably not going to solve the problem. We need to understand this deeper. And I get to really dig into their problems and then provide a list of all the ways that we could help them. And that's really enjoyable.
I love hearing how multifaceted like toxic environments are, because it's not just one thing. I mean, of course I don't love hearing it, but it's so multifaceted, and it really requires you to dig into the root problem. I would love to hear your expertise with that. I have a little bit of experience with that, but you have so much expertise. I would really love to hear what you're like. First of all, what are the most common signs? Let's start with this. What are the most common signs of a toxic workplace culture?
Yeah, well, some easily observable things are, people making inappropriate jokes, people laughing at others' expense, gossip. So those are kind of, you can overtly, and the part of the problem that I see is that HR is focused on harassment, and we have our harassment prevention training, right? If someone tells a sexual joke, you go to HR. But there's all this other behavior that's uncivil, that's not unlawful, and therefore doesn't get a lot of attention. And that's really Civility Partners' mission is, let's talk about that stuff, the gossip, the uncivil behavior, the conflict that's not getting resolved. And so some things that would also tell you that the environment is toxic is things like high turnover, in a specific department, or if we coach leaders accused of bullying. So obviously HR manager may be getting a lot of complaints about that one individual. So I'll just lastly say, one of the other problems I see is we tend to villainize the uncivil person, right? Well, here, this team member is a gossiper, let's address that. But then the organization rarely says, well, what are we doing or not doing that gave that person permission to be a gossip? And that's where I'm in. It's not a training on civility. That doesn't solve a gossip problem. It's what accountability measures do you have in place in the organization?
Exactly. That must be a really interesting job. People are hiring you to take them to make them accountable, which is really interesting, right? They're like paying you to tell you, hey, don't do this, which is really interesting how there's this ties into civility, this sort of, I'm not, a possible lack of self-awareness, a possible lack of taking self-accountability. I'd love to hear, what are the first couple of steps that you do to assess that issue in a way it's a really fine line. As someone who's not in that profession, I feel like it'd be very difficult for me to sort of tell someone to be accountable in a way it needs to be professional.
Yeah.
So how do you do that in a way that doesn't really rock the boat,
Yeah. So if we're working with the organization, we always try to let them or get them to let us start with a survey. So we do what's called a climate assessment. A lot of employers do engagement surveys, which measures essentially enthusiasm. That's different than culture. So a climate assessment is a survey that looks at engagement and inclusivity and internal relationships and communication effectiveness. So we're kind of taking a snapshot of the culture, and then we can say, here's the data that shows us where things are wrong. And then we help craft a plan and implement the plan to adjust that. So for example, one survey score we always see is people don't get enough feedback, right? So then I think a lot of times employers go, oh, well, we need to do a training on giving feedback. Well, no, you have to look at the organization first. What are the processes that hinder feedback or encourage feedback? Does your performance system, and then we do the training on how to do that well. So that's the kind of the missing piece. And then leaders obviously have to be very communicative about their focus on solving that issue. So that's one of the things I love, is to look at a survey and kind of go like, question 25, we can fix that low survey score by doing X, Y, and Z. When we coach leaders accused of bullying or harassing, we interview 15 people that work with them, and we just ask, tell us about your perceptions of this person. So it's not, HR does the fact finding and the investigation and all of that. We're asking about perceptions. That's where we operate. And then it's pretty profound experience. We take all of that interview data, move it all into themes, and then I read that data to them. So it's no longer HR saying, hey, I'm hearing complaints, be nicer. It's, I interviewed 15 people whose names you provided me. And
Right.
The first theme is that you shame people in public. And then I read the 25 bullet points related to that theme. So they're often pretty appalled that that's how bad they're perceived. They know people think they can be tough, but to see it on paper over the course of 20 pages is a lot for them to take in. And then they want to change.
Yeah. And I'm sure in your line of work, you've seen patterns of behavior with leaders, and that's a big one too. And if you can divulge into that, the patterns of behavior that you have seen consistently over the many years that you've had this business, but also what people can do. Like if you have a business, how can you hire leaders to prevent that and to really circumvent those patterns to exist within their business?
Yeah, it's how you interview, right? That's one piece. So asking questions like, behavior-based interview questions, asking a question like, tell me about a time that you disagreed with a leader or another key person on a project, and what happened? How did that unfold? How did you solve it? What did you learn? Questions like that are going to tell you, because if they're like, oh, I've never disagreed with somebody, or, well, it was a subordinate and I just got him on board, those aren't the people you want. You're looking for them to be talking about collaboration and problem solving and respect. And so that's one key piece. I always encourage group interviews too. So maybe you have your interview process, but then could that person maybe go out to lunch with the team they're going to work with as part of the interview process, so that everyone can do a gut check on whether or not they like that person and what they bring.
Yeah, that's such a good one, because group dynamics you can't really suss out when you're doing a one-on-one thing, but it's really wild how individuals change around groups.
Yep.
Just in like human settings, not even just the professional setting, but in social settings too. And that's such a big takeaway, I think, from this conversation is leaders doing group sessions, and seeing the dynamics evolve and like where people place themselves and others on that sort of like invisible hierarchy. I
was going to say that. Yeah, it's natural as survival instincts kick in a group setting to establish dominance or spend, and so, that new hire is going to be, or that potential candidate's going to be assessing, who is dominant here in terms of the social order versus the manager subordinate order. And they're going to be sussing you out. Yeah. So I think if you want to invite somebody into your group or your work team, they should also interview.
Yeah. And being perceptive of that too. I think it's really important as a leader to understand the psychological thing that's happening in front of you. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
that sometimes it can go over leaders' heads where they'll have a group meeting, but there's no understanding of the psychology that's going on in front of you. And it's just kind of like, what can you give me? Which is
Yeah.
normal, because you want to progress your business and you want to succeed. But
Right.
the underlying is like understand the psychology and dynamics that's going around. It's sort of like a two-way conversation
Yeah.
that hopefully both can pick up on,
Yep.
and hopefully discussions like these can amplify that. And I'm sure you've come a long way since 2008 where there wasn't that much terminology, or maybe there was, but like it wasn't really being strewn around as much, so
You
having
know,
conversations.
yeah, just to comment on that really quick. Back in the day, when I did get to speak, audience members would come up to me constantly and say things like, I never heard of workplace bullying before, but thank you so much for putting that all out there, because now I have words to describe a situation that I was in or am in. Or they would come up and say, I think I might have been a bully at a previous life at a last job, and that doesn't happen anymore. So the vernacular is definitely out there. But yeah, there was just something to, I'm not crazy. Here's a
Yeah.
person in front of the room talking about this thing. And that was and still is part of the problem. If you're being bullied or gossiped about or anything that's toxic, that's um, it's sometimes hard to put your finger on. It's hard to prove. You feel
Mhm.
crazy. Your HR manager may just say, just suck it up, be an adult. That's just how they are. So there's a lot of like lack of care for just each individual in an
Right.
organization, that they're a person who has feelings. They're not a cog in a wheel.
Exactly. And it's nuanced, and hopefully everyone can find what terminology works for them and they can use it to empower and armor themselves against this problem, obviously. And
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about, so you've created a variety of LinkedIn learning courses. I'd
Mhm.
love to hear more about that. And that seems to coincide and really facilitate all the work that you've done. I'd love to hear more about that and how people can access that, and all the work that you have done.
Yeah, yeah. So LinkedIn Learning is available if you have a LinkedIn Premium account. Also, there are a lot of larger organizations like universities that offer LinkedIn Learning subscriptions as part of their employee benefits, and also to students to watch, just more knowledge there. So yeah, if you have a premium account, or your university or workplace has access to it, there's tons of great content there.
Mhm.
And yeah, LinkedIn has offered me the opportunity to put my voice out there in the world. And I do, not to be like, I'm amazing, but I think I talk about harassment very differently, kind of what I was saying. Let's not just focus on that unlawful thing. And weirdly, that's a new perspective, apparently. So I just feel like I have a lot to say about how to make the world better. And I appreciate LinkedIn's allowing me to do that, and podcasts like this. And yeah, so we've done tons of online courses. I've done, work with clients like NASA and Chevron, as you said, all the way down to training for a little 7-person law firm down the street and everything in between. So
Yeah. Are there certain, since you've worked with so many clients, have you seen, I know we mentioned this earlier, do you see patterns where you're like, oh, this again? Like, why does this thing keep popping up? This one thing where you're like, people, get it into your brain, stop doing this, you know?
yeah, I mean, I do. Let's see. So for coaching people who bully, that narrative is very much the same, where people have been complaining to HR. HR has been trying to get the CEO to give them permission to hold this person accountable. They're highly valued. They're good performers. Unfortunately, they're beating everybody else down while they're climbing to the top. And so the CEO is like, no, no, leave them alone. And that's just how they are. Why can't
Mhm.
everybody suck it up?
Right.
And then usually there's some sort of catalyst that finally causes the CEO to say to HR, okay, I hear you. Let's solve this. And what that catalyst is varies. Sometimes it's another important person leaves and says, I just don't want to work with that jerk anymore. One time they had the seventh, not the first, the seventh hostile work environment complaint that they needed to investigate. And that was the catalyst. So there's a variety of things. So that's a pattern that I just see almost every time. And it is frustrating because I think CEOs, what is wrong with you? You can hold them accountable to good behavior and they can still perform. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So that's really frustrating for me. And then, the other thing I see a lot, as I mentioned earlier, was just that organizations don't take accountability for their role in things. They want me to do a training on some topic because they want it to solve the problem. And it's like, you can give people $1 million, but if they're in the dollar store, they can't, so it's helping organizations see the role they play. And sometimes that really takes some coaching of the CEO. We've done surveys, climate assessments, where the CEO did not like the results, and I think they take it personally, probably because they're the leader. But I've had a couple clients where the CEO just didn't buy it and like, nope, I don't believe this is what my workforce feels. And it's like, okay, well,
yeah.
Carry
on or not. How do you, with that being said, how do you encourage employees at all levels to sort of take ownership of that company culture and, their choice to work in that company and engage to make it more positive if that does happen, or if they don't have the privilege of having you come in and have a CEO ask you to help with that? How do you encourage employees to really take charge and take ownership?
That's a great question and something we do a lot of. So, sometimes the message in a training is, I can't help, I wasn't hired to fix all of that. I'm here to give you a training. And all I can say is use the tools that I've given you in spite of whatever the context is. And we do this training called Upstander training, where it's all about that. What keeps you from calling someone out if you see a microaggression or some sort of toxic behavior, all the way up to bullying and harassment? What's the fear and how do you overcome that fear? And then here are some real tips and tricks to step in. And being an upstander, we talk about this a lot. When you may not feel comfortable to say, hey, yesterday, you said something in a meeting that really hurt my feelings or kind of put me on blast in front of everyone. Can we talk about it? Maybe everybody doesn't have that courage, and that's okay. You can delegate that to somebody else. You can talk to a friend and ask them to do it. Or sometimes, like if you see yelling in the office or in the hallway, just making your presence known can make you be an upstander, and where it's just like as we talked about group dynamics, it shifts the vibe if you stand there. So there's a lot of ways to step in and have control of the culture. You don't have to rely on your manager to fix it. And in fact, most managers don't get training on how to fix things like that. And most managers don't even know that is an expectation or should be. So that is a lot of messaging in the training, is that you get to control the scenario around you and you are responsible for the culture. It's not leader. There's that saying, culture comes from the top. No way. Culture comes from the people in the team. The CEO could say, I want this to be the most inclusive, innovative, best customer service ever. That's our culture. But if I go to work every day and there's bad things happening around me, that's not the culture for me. So culture does not come from the top.
Right. I love that. Culture comes from the people who work in that culture, not who sit at the top, which is a part of it. But I mean, you have the conductor and then you have the musicians, so it's like, who's the one making the music, both are important.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love to hear just what civility looks like to you, and what we talk a lot about bullying and harassment, but what are some key definitions and factors of civility? Like, what would be the sort of utopian workplace culture that's in your mind?
So in my mind, incivility is demonstrating that you don't value somebody, right? And that could be by cutting them off on the freeway or interrupting them while they're talking, or stepping in front of them in line or what have you. And so civility is the opposite. Things that or actions or communication that show you value someone. And it's simple. Saying excuse me if you bump into someone, that's civil. That's civility. In terms of a utopian work environment, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all in our own heads. For me, it's an environment where people feel comfortable to say, yesterday this happened, or hey, I noticed you interrupt me a lot. Could we talk about it? And then the other person would say, oh my gosh, tell me more. That, to me, that is the ideal work environment, because there's always going to be bad behaviors, intentional or not. It's the ability to work through it. And unfortunately, adults aren't that great at conflict or having these conversations. A lot of relationships, don't work out. So it's like this mission to just get us to talk to each other and care a little bit more about how each other's feeling.
Yeah, it seems to just really come down to compassion and come down to empathy and sort of not taking things personally when someone says, hey, you did something that might have slighted me, because everyone has their own different perspectives. Like that could have been harmless and innocuous to you, but not to someone else,
Yep.
So what I want to know, with that being said, what trends or shifts are you seeing in workplace culture as we enter sort of remote and hybrid models? Are you getting different sort of complaints with that generation and with this sort of new mode of working? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, so I think employers are really struggling with how to help people connect. We're talking about showing that you value someone through, hi, how was your weekend, on an email before you jump into business. And so those connections are less likely if I can't see you, because then you're just somebody over there in another country or whatever that I only ever email with. So employers do have the task of making more time for people to make those connections in light, there's no water cooler talk or meeting in the kitchen accidentally. So that has to be more purposeful. So that's a trend. I also think as the older generation starts to phase out, baby boomers who are authoritarian, you just work hard and get your check. Then I think about people like my 10-year-old daughter, who's learning about bullying in school. And I didn't learn about bullying in school, and they do mentorship programs. So she's good at writing. So she finishes her assignment and the teacher's got her going around helping others. And I'm seeing that a lot, at least at her elementary school. I would assume, training or teaching kids has evolved to be more, they sit in pods now instead of desk space forward. So I think about the authoritarian kind of baby boomers versus her and everybody in between. And I think the pendulum will swing a bit to someone like my daughter, who's now been made much more aware of inclusivity and diversity and bullying and respect, that she would demand a more respectful work environment than, those of us at my age. We can demand it, but the employer can say, I don't care about that, as many CEOs do. And then lastly, I'll say, obviously, with remote environment, it makes it easy for me to say, okay, well, I don't want to work here. I'm going to go get a job where the employer's in Alabama and I'm in California. But, so it opens the door for more employment opportunities for people to be able to go where they want to be.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't seem too hard to like squeeze in a little nicety in an email. Hi, how are you? Wanted to circle back about this project. You know what I mean? It's just like, it takes 5 seconds to say, how is your weekend? And it really like sets the tone. There should be a whole class on setting tone.
Yeah. I'll just share. So one person that I coached had been accused of being a bully. She was in the financial department of a large insurance firm in the United States, and that's everywhere. And yeah, her thing was, that was one of her feedback themes. She just goes straight into business. I don't think she cares about me at all. She just wants to know the number or the answer to her question. And so we talked about that. Like, why couldn't you just say, I hope you had a nice weekend? And she's like, well, I don't have time. I don't have time for that. I'm like, okay, we're talking about a fraction of a second. And it's going to, like, if productivity and numbers is your thing, consider how much more how fast things will go if people feel a little bit of relief when they get an email from you because you're not demanding, and it's like helping her realize that, it takes you a fraction of a second and the impact on the other person is going to speed them up versus, oh, there's an email from her. Let me find the answer. Hey, I got an email from that person again, and then there's all this versus like, oh, she said hi. My weekend was great. Here's your answer.
Yeah. It's interesting because it makes me think of like love languages. This person might not need it. They might not need a hi, how are you? You know what I mean? But other people do. And it's just kind of like, even like in those interpersonal relationships, like, are you a gift giver? Are you like acts of service? Like you might not need it, but your partner or your business associate might. So it's like figuring out your like company's love language.
There's another great example is DISC, the self-assessment. You can get that online for free. I love DISC because it's about communication style. So it's looking at how you function in terms of people and tasks, which are the two things we have at work, people and tasks. So I like it. And I happen to be a high D, which means D stands for dominant. I don't like that phrase, but it means I move quick. If I get focused on something, I'm in it. And so I can be that person that's like, just tell me the answer. I don't have time to hear about your weekend. I have a facility, so I have to be hyper aware of that, right? That's not how everybody functions. And then my facilitator, she's a high I, which stands for influencer, most people are a little bit of all four, and then one really stands out. She's nothing else. She's just 100% influencer. That, of course, means she likes people. She wants to talk to you and get to know you. And I just remember we tell this story all the time when we trained together. She came into my office one day and I hadn't seen her in maybe a week or something. And I kind of come out like, Tony, I'm so glad you're here. What's going on with that client? And she goes, I had a good weekend. How was yours? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. How was your weekend? I definitely don't need the answer about the client. Right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the question. So those are the kinds of things where it's like, she didn't take it personally. It was just like, I know Catherine's a high D, and like, it's fine to kind of interrupt her and bring her back. So that's civility, right? She was empathetic with me. She didn't go like, you never this and that. So she empathized with Matt, and then I could empathize with her. So
totally. And allow resentment to accrue, and sometimes that happens too. And you're just like, you don't want to say anything. And then over time, just your language and relationship declines, and then workplace environment declines. So yeah, I hear you. It's like really important to cherish, it's like if you care about someone, if you love someone, then you're going to speak up and you're going to say something that bothers you. It's the same thing with that. So good job, Tony. Good job, Catherine.
Thank you. Pat on the back. Yeah. The things and the tools like that. There's lots of self-assessments and things out there. And those are helpful, I think, because they do, it provides a common language. It's like, well, there's Catherine's D versus, oh, here comes Tony with the I. So and there's S and C, which stands for people who really like data and don't want to talk to people. And then there's people who like data and people. So stuff like that is another great way for employers to help create civil work environments, because it gives you language and something to point to, problem solve.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. A big takeaway for me in this conversation was emotional intelligence doesn't stop at your house. It really carries through in the workplace. And I think that over time, it's normal and normalized to walk into an office and leave that EI at the door, and you should really carry it inside with you. And I think that just because you put on a business suit doesn't mean that you don't need to have emotions,
100%. And employers need to make room for those emotions too, because these are people, after all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're reaching our 30-minute mark. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. If you have any last remarks, or if you want to plug in anything, I would love to hear that.
Sure. Yeah. CivilityPartners.com is my website. There's tons of free resources on there. I'm all about tangible action items. And so definitely get over there, and there's scripts, things you can say if you witness something kind of ugly or toxic or uncivil. So there, definitely go there, civilitypartners.com. And thank you for having me here today.
Thank you. We are going to link all of those sites and information and helpful tool, everything on our website at www.civiltalk.com/podcasts. So for our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Catherine's work and all of her LinkedIn learning courses, those will all be linked on our website. Thank you again for tuning in to Civil Talk. We hope today's episode inspired you to take steps towards a more respectful and empathetic workplace. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and join us next time for more conversations on civility, emotional intelligence, and making a positive impact in our world. Until next time, keep striving for civility and empathy in all that you do. Thank you.